Sophia Hayes sat by the window of her small apartment, exhausted after a long shift at the hospital. The snow outside softened the city's edges, offering her a rare sense of peace. She walked over to a shelf where a photo of her late father stood, his warm smile still comforting her. "I'm home, Papa," she whispered, as if he could hear her. Years ago, she had put her career on hold to care for him during his battle with cancer. The emotional toll had been immense, but she had no regrets. She often remembered his final words to her, "You always put yourself last, Sophia. You need to value your own life more." Those words resonated with her, especially now, as she struggled with her mother's harsh expectations. Sophia reheated leftover dinner and thought about the call she hadn't answered from her mother, Catherine. Since her father's death, Catherine had grown critical, especially toward Sophia. Her mother constantly compared her to her younger sister, Olivia, who seemed to excel in everything. Olivia had recently gotten engaged, and although Sophia had helped support Olivia's future, she hadn't received any invitation to the wedding. The absence of the invitation hurt, and she tried to convince herself it was just an oversight. But as the wedding approached, her anxiety grew. Should she attend anyway? What kind of gift should she buy? These questions weighed on her as she finished her meal and prepared for bed, uncertain about her place in her own family. Sophia sat quietly in her apartment, staring at the phone in her hand. Catherine's call had gone unanswered, just like so many before it. The last few years had strained their relationship, and Sophia wasn't sure how much more she could endure. Her mother's criticisms had only grown sharper since her father's passing. It was as though Catherine didn't see the sacrifices Sophia had made, how she had put her career, her dreams, and even her own happiness on hold to care for her family. "You never think about yourself, Sophia. Maybe if you cared more about your future, things would be different," Catherine's voice echoed in Sophia's mind, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. The tension between them had become unbearable, and it hurt more than she was willing to admit. Catherine had always favored Olivia, showering her with praise and support, while Sophia's every move seemed to be met with disapproval. Sophia leaned back against the couch, a deep sigh escaping her lips. It was a familiar ache, a sense of being constantly overlooked. Olivia had always been the golden child in Catherine's eyes. From the time they were young, Olivia had received the praise, the attention, the love. While Sophia had always been the responsible one, the one who took care of everything, Olivia had been the one to soar. It wasn't fair, but Sophia had learned to accept it. As she stared at her phone, a wave of frustration washed over her. She had done everything for them, sacrificed so much, and yet, it never seemed to be enough. Olivia's recent engagement felt like another reminder that she wasn't part of the family's picture-perfect image. She had helped Olivia through law school, paid for her tuition, and supported her in every way she could, yet when the time came for Olivia to celebrate one of the happiest moments of her life, she hadn't even been invited. Before I share what happened next, the moment that shook Sophia to her core, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt left out or overlooked by those closest to you, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. Sophia closed her eyes, pushing aside the pain, but it lingered, a constant reminder of how she had always been second in her mother's eyes. She reached for the stack of bills on the table, hoping to distract herself, but her mind kept drifting back to Olivia, to the wedding, to the cold emptiness of not being invited. The thought gnawed at her, but she kept pushing it aside, convincing herself that it wasn't a big deal. She should be happy for Olivia, after all, her sister deserved the best. But deep down, Sophia couldn't help but wonder if there would ever be a place for her in this perfect family. Days passed, and with each one, the absence of the invitation became harder to ignore. Sophia tried to tell herself that it was nothing, that maybe Olivia was just too busy with the wedding preparations to send it. But as the date neared, the weight of it all settled deeper into her chest. The silence was deafening, and every time she glanced at her phone, she couldn't help but feel the sting of rejection. It wasn't like her to dwell on these things, to let them consume her, but the thought that her own sister had left her out of something so important was a wound that refused to heal. The more she tried to suppress the thought, the more it seemed to grow, like a seed planted in her mind, threatening to overtake her. She couldn't escape it. It was always there, lurking in the background, making her feel small and insignificant. What was it about her that made her so easy to forget? Was she not worthy enough to be part of her sister's joy? Finally, she couldn't hold it in anymore. She picked up her phone and dialed Olivia's number, her heart racing in her chest. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail. She hung up before the beep could sound, her throat tight with emotion. She stared at the screen for a moment, wondering if she should leave a message or just let it go. But the words felt stuck, lodged somewhere deep within her. The next day, she tried again, but this time the call was answered. "Hey, Sophia. Sorry, I've been so busy. The wedding's coming up fast, you know how it is." Olivia's voice was cheerful, but there was a distant note to it that made Sophia's heart ache. She could almost hear the excitement in her sister's tone, the whirlwind of wedding plans and happy moments. And yet, there was nothing for her. "I just wanted to check in, you know, to see how you're doing," Sophia said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. But the words hung awkwardly in the air, as if they didn't belong. "I've been meaning to send the invite, I swear. Things have just been so hectic," Olivia continued. "But don't worry, you're definitely coming, right?" Sophia's stomach churned. The casualness of the conversation felt almost like a slap in the face. She forced a smile even though her sister couldn't see it. "Of course," she replied, her voice faltering slightly. "I'll be there." As she ended the call, a wave of disbelief washed over her. Olivia hadn't even sent the invitation yet, and now she was being told she was definitely coming. It felt like a half-hearted promise, something that had been said just to make things easier. Sophia wasn't sure if she felt more hurt or confused. Was Olivia unaware of the way their mother had always treated her? Had she even noticed how things had changed between them over the years? Or had she simply become too absorbed in her own life to care about the invisible cracks that were starting to show? Sophia's thoughts swirled as she sat in her apartment, staring at the untouched wedding invitation that had finally arrived. It had been placed carefully on the table, but it felt heavy, like a reminder of everything that had been left unsaid. She wasn't sure if she was angry, sad, or both. What was she supposed to feel? How could she celebrate her sister's happiness when her own place in this family felt so uncertain? Her fingers traced the edge of the envelope as she thought about how different things had become. The invitation was a formality now, a symbol of what she had always hoped for, belonging, acceptance. But even as she held it in her hands, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that something had already been broken long before the wedding preparations began. She closed her eyes, silently wishing for the chance to feel like she mattered in her own family, for once. The day of the wedding arrived, and Sophia stood before her mirror, adjusting the simple blue dress she had carefully chosen. It wasn't extravagant, but it was meaningful. Her father had always loved the color, and the dress felt like a small tribute to him, a reminder of everything she had lost. She put on the pearl earrings he had given her, the ones she wore for special occasions, and took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had convinced herself that everything would be fine, that she would just blend into the background, quietly supporting Olivia on her big day. But as she held the invitation in her hand, a nagging feeling persisted, making her wonder if she was walking into something she wasn't truly welcome in. The taxi ride to the venue felt long and heavy, her stomach twisting with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She tried to focus on the streets of the city, the familiar skyline, but her mind kept drifting back to the one question that had been haunting her: why hadn't Olivia reached out sooner? Why was there this invisible distance between them now? As the taxi pulled up to the venue, Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. She had made it this far. She was going to be there for Olivia, her sister, who was starting this new chapter in her life. It was supposed to be a celebration. When she entered the grand hall, she felt instantly out of place. The elegance of the venue, the laughter, the chatter of guests, it all felt like a world she didn't belong to. The marble floors gleamed under the chandeliers, and the scent of flowers filled the air. Sophia's gaze flickered over the sea of unfamiliar faces, but she couldn't spot her sister or mother anywhere. The warmth of the room only made her feel colder. As she approached the reception desk, the young staff member greeted her with a smile, but that smile faltered when she checked the guest list. "I'm sorry, but your name isn't on the list," she said, her voice polite but firm. Sophia froze, her heart sinking in her chest. She had known it was coming, but hearing the words made it all too real. She smiled weakly, trying to play it off as a simple mistake. "There must be some mistake," she said. "I'm the bride's sister, Sophia Hayes." The staff member scanned the list again, this time looking more closely, but there was no change in her expression. "I'm very sorry, ma'am, but your name isn't here." Perhaps you were missed? The words felt like a punch to the gut. How could they have missed her? How could her own sister have left her off the guest list for the most important day of her life? Feeling the weight of the situation settling heavily in her chest, Sophia turned to leave, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of Olivia, any sign that maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding. There was no mistake. This was the reality of the situation. As she walked through the venue, trying to keep her composure, she spotted Catherine standing by the corner, chatting with some guests, a glass of champagne in hand. When her mother saw her, her expression shifted for a brief second, just long enough for Sophia to see the flicker of something in her eyes. A recognition. A coldness. But that was all. Sophia approached her cautiously, not sure what to say. She couldn't understand how her mother could just stand there, acting as if nothing was wrong. She didn't even ask if Sophia was okay, or why she hadn't been let in. No, Catherine was too busy basking in the glow of the celebration to care about the daughter she had neglected for years. "Mom," Sophia said quietly, her voice trembling, "they told me I wasn't on the list. Is there some mistake?" Catherine looked her up and down, her gaze dismissive, as if assessing her appearance. "There's no mistake," she replied coldly, her words cutting through the air. "Did you honestly think you were invited?" Her voice was low, but the words stung more than Sophia had anticipated. The bitter reality of being excluded from a family event, not because of anything she had done, but because of who she was, hit her like a wave. Sophia could feel her face flushing, her heart racing, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. She had expected a lot of things, awkwardness, perhaps even some tension, but she never thought her own mother would treat her like this. It was a rejection so deep, so final, that it left her speechless. "She doesn't need reminders of failures like you." Catherine's voice was barely a whisper now, but the venom in her words was unmistakable. "Olivia is starting her life. She doesn't need you here, trying to steal the spotlight." Sophia's eyes stung with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but something inside her told her that there was no point. The truth was already out, and the damage had been done. She had no place in her mother's world, no place in the picture-perfect family Catherine had created for herself and Olivia. Just as she turned to leave, a familiar voice called out to her. "Sophia?" It was Barbara, Olivia's soon-to-be mother-in-law. She looked concerned, stepping toward Sophia with a confused expression on her face. Barbara had always been kind to her, a small solace in the midst of the coldness that surrounded her family. But this time, Barbara's presence only reminded Sophia of how much had been lost. How much she had been left out of. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have overheard," Barbara said, her voice gentle. "But I need you to know, Caitlin, Olivia, she wanted you here. She didn't want this." Sophia could hardly believe her ears. Her sister wanted her there? But then why hadn't she invited her? Why was she being treated like this? Her thoughts swirled, the confusion and hurt threatening to overwhelm her. "Please, just leave it," Sophia said quietly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She didn't want to cause a scene. Not here. Not now. This was Olivia's day, and even though she had been excluded, she refused to take the attention away from her sister. Just, give this to her, Sophia said, taking the gift she had carefully prepared for Olivia, the handmade blanket she had spent months knitting, and placing it on the table. If it's not too much trouble. And with that, she turned and walked away, the weight of the entire situation pressing down on her shoulders. It felt as though everything she had ever known, everything she had hoped for, had been shattered in an instant. As she left the hall, the tears she had been holding back finally fell, the weight of the rejection too much to bear. Sophia stepped out into the cold night, the tears freezing on her cheeks as she silently wondered if she would ever truly belong in her own family. Sophia walked through the hotel lobby in a daze, the cold night air hitting her like a shock as she stepped outside. Her emotions were a whirlwind: hurt, confusion, anger, each one layered on top of the other, making it hard to breathe. She felt like an outsider in her own life, excluded from the family she had always tried so hard to be a part of. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but there was no one left to turn to. Her mother had made it clear where she stood. And Olivia? Olivia was no better, just as distant and uninvolved as their mother. As she entered the taxi, the weight of the evening crushed down on her. She stared out of the window, unable to shake the image of her mother's cold smile, the dismissal in her voice. How had things come to this? How had her family become so fractured, so full of silence and rejection? She had spent so many years sacrificing for them, only to be left behind when it mattered most. The thought of it made her chest ache, but she had no choice but to swallow her pain and move forward. The drive home felt interminable, and by the time she arrived at her apartment, the first hints of dawn were creeping into the sky. Sophia stepped inside, too exhausted to do anything but collapse onto the couch. She picked up her phone, hoping for a message from Olivia, but there was nothing. Just the usual silence. That's when the doorbell rang. Startled, Sophia got up and slowly made her way to the door. She wasn't sure who it could be, her heart sank as she reached the peephole. Standing on the other side were Olivia, Barbara, and, surprisingly, her mother, Catherine. Her stomach twisted. What could they possibly want now? Sophia opened the door, her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? Olivia stepped forward, her face pale and filled with regret. Sophia, please, can we talk? Her words were urgent, but her eyes told a different story, one of guilt, confusion, and deep sorrow. It was as if she had only just realized the truth of what had happened, and the weight of it had hit her all at once. Barbara stood behind her, giving Sophia a warm but apologetic look. Sophia, we had no idea what was going on. I'm so sorry. We were all kept in the dark. Catherine, standing off to the side, didn't speak right away. Her eyes were downcast, her posture stiff and uncomfortable, as though the reality of what she had done had finally started to break through the walls she had built up over the years. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, tentative. Sophia, I had no idea that things had gotten this bad between you and Olivia. I never meant for it to come to this. Sophia's heart hammered in her chest. She had no idea what to feel, how to respond to the words she was hearing. Her mother, admitting that she had failed her, was something Sophia hadn't expected. What do you mean? Why was I left out? Why was I not even invited to my sister's wedding? Sophia's voice cracked as the rawness of the situation poured out. I've spent my whole life trying to be there for you, trying to keep this family together, and yet you left me out. Olivia stepped forward, her hands trembling. I didn't know, Sophia. I didn't know that Mom had. She stopped herself, eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't know she had excluded you. I never knew she had taken me aside, told me that you didn't want to come, or that you were too busy. I was lied to. I thought you just weren't interested. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about? Olivia pulled out her phone and showed Sophia an old string of messages. The texts were from their mother, sent months ago, right around the time of her graduation. The words made Sophia's stomach turn. Mary can't come to your graduation. She's too busy with work. Don't worry, we'll celebrate just us. Mary won't be at your birthday. She's always too busy with her own life. Don't worry about it. Sophia felt as though the ground had been ripped from beneath her. Her mother had been actively lying, manipulating Olivia into believing she was always too busy or uninterested. All the moments she had missed, the occasions where she could have been there for Olivia, had been hidden under a veil of deceit. Olivia was staring at the screen, shock spreading across her face. I had no idea. I thought you were just, never around. That you didn't care. Her voice faltered, a wave of guilt flooding through her. I should have known, I should have asked. I should have done more. Sophia's eyes stung, but she couldn't look away. Why didn't you? Why did you believe her? The words were heavy with all the years of hurt, the years of sacrifice, and the growing distance between them. Why did you let her control everything? Barbara stepped forward, her face soft with sympathy. I'm so sorry, Sophia. Your mother, she's been manipulating things for a long time. We all thought we were doing the right thing, but we were wrong. This wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. Sophia felt the weight of their words press against her chest, but it didn't bring her relief. Instead, it brought confusion and a flood of emotions she didn't know how to process. She looked at her mother, standing there like a stranger in her own home, and for the first time, she saw the cracks in the woman who had always been so unyielding. Why? Sophia whispered. Why did you do this? Why did you make me feel like I didn't belong? Catherine looked at the ground, her voice trembling with regret. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to admit that I had failed you both. I made everything about what I wanted, about keeping up appearances. And I thought I was protecting you, Olivia. But I wasn't. I wasn't protecting anyone. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Sophia could hardly breathe as the realization settled in. The family she had fought for, the family she had sacrificed everything for, had been built on lies. And it wasn't just Catherine who had lied. It was everyone. Everyone had been complicit in the story her mother had woven, and now it was all falling apart. Sophia felt the tears finally come, but they weren't just tears of hurt, they were tears of relief. The truth had been exposed, and maybe, just maybe, it was the first step toward healing. But it didn't make the hurt go away. It didn't fix the years of brokenness. It just was. I don't know how to fix this, Sophia whispered, the words feeling like an admission of failure. But maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. A chapter that began with truth. The room was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that weighed on the chest and made it hard to breathe. Sophia sat on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as she stared at the floor. Olivia and Barbara were still standing nearby, their presence a quiet support, but it was her mother, Catherine, who had been the cause of the pain, who had been the source of all the hurt. And now, for the first time in years, Catherine was standing before her, the hardness in her eyes replaced by a softness that Sophia had never seen before. It was the first crack in the wall that had always separated them. Catherine cleared her throat, her voice trembling. Sophia, She paused, as if the words were stuck in her throat. I've failed you. I failed both of you, and I don't know how to begin to fix it. Sophia's chest tightened, but she didn't speak. She wasn't sure she could. There was so much to say, but the words felt heavy, like stones in her mouth. Instead, she watched her mother, waiting, listening to the tremor in her voice, unsure of what to expect. Catherine took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving Sophia's. I should have seen what I was doing. I should have known how much I was pushing you away, how much I was hurting you. But I was so wrapped up in my own bitterness, in my own failures, that I couldn't see the damage I was causing. I wanted to protect Olivia, but in doing so, I pushed you aside. I treated you like you didn't matter, like you were never enough, and I am so sorry for that. Sophia felt the words pierce her, the sharpness of them digging into places she had buried long ago. But there was something else there, too, something raw, something that made her heart ache with both pain and relief. Her mother was apologizing. For the first time, she was truly admitting what she had done. The years of resentment, the years of silence, had led to this moment, and now, with every word Catherine spoke, the pieces of their broken relationship seemed to shift, ever so slightly. "I was wrong," Catherine whispered, her voice shaking. "I was so focused on my own mistakes, my own disappointments, that I couldn't see how much you were giving, how much you were sacrificing. I treated you like you were invisible, and I don't know how to make that right." The tears that Sophia had been holding back finally fell, one by one, silent and steady. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this much in one moment: anger, relief, sorrow, all swirling together in a storm that left her breathless. Her mother had never been one to apologize, to admit her faults. For years, Sophia had waited for this moment, for the chance to hear those words, but it had always felt like an impossible dream. Now, here they were. Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to find her voice. I didn't know how much longer I could keep trying. I didn't know how much longer I could pretend like everything was okay. But hearing you say this, hearing you admit it, it's not going to make everything okay, Mom. It's going to take time. A lot of time." Catherine nodded, her face soft with regret. "I understand that. I know I've hurt you beyond words, and I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight. But I need you to know that I am truly sorry. And I will do whatever it takes to rebuild what we've lost, even if it takes a lifetime." Sophia closed her eyes, the weight of the past and the promise of the future pressing down on her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe a little easier. The path to forgiveness wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but maybe, just maybe, it was possible. When she finally opened her eyes, she looked at Catherine, really looked at her, for the first time in what felt like forever. "I can't forget, Mom. I can't just erase the years of hurt, of feeling like I wasn't enough. But, maybe I can learn to forgive. Maybe we can rebuild, piece by piece." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, and she stepped forward, taking Sophia's hands in her own. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll spend every day proving to you that I can be the mother you always deserved. I know it won't be easy, and I won't expect you to just forget. But I promise I will try, Sophia. I will try every day to be better for you." Sophia squeezed her mother's hands, feeling the weight of the words settle into her heart. She wasn't sure what the future held, she didn't know how long it would take to heal, or whether the scars would ever fade completely. But for the first time in a long time, she had hope. Hope that, maybe, there was a way forward for them. That forgiveness, though difficult, could start to heal the wounds they had both caused. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm willing to try too. But we have to take it one step at a time." In that moment, a small, fragile bridge formed between them, a bridge that would take time, patience, and effort to rebuild, but it was there. And that was the first step. As the tears continued to fall, Catherine pulled Sophia into a hug, holding her tightly, as if to never let go. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And that, for now, was enough. Days passed since the heartfelt apology, and although the air in their home was still heavy with the weight of their past, there was a sense of cautious hope. Sophia could feel the difference, even if it was small. Her mother, Catherine, had been trying, really trying. She kept her promises, reached out more often, and never once let a conversation end without expressing her remorse. It wasn't easy, and it didn't make everything magically better, but the cracks that had formed between them were slowly starting to heal, one fragile step at a time. Then, the phone call came. Olivia, sounding more like the sister Sophia remembered, invited her to a quiet gathering at Barbara and Robert's house, a small family reunion to celebrate new beginnings. It wasn't a grand event, not like the wedding that had torn at the fabric of their relationship, but something simpler, something more intimate. It felt like the right kind of step, the kind that didn't try to erase the past, but acknowledged it and moved forward. Sophia stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the soft green dress she had chosen, a quiet smile forming on her lips. It wasn't the same anxiety she had felt before, this time, there was peace in her heart. She had no grand expectations, only the hope that today would be another beginning, another step toward reclaiming the family she thought she had lost. When she arrived at Barbara and Robert's house, the warm light from inside felt like a welcoming embrace. It wasn't extravagant, it wasn't even planned to be a grand gesture. It was just family, together, at last. She stepped inside, and for the first time in years, she felt like she belonged. The familiar faces of Barbara and Robert greeted her with warmth, and even her mother, Catherine, stood by the door, a small but genuine smile on her face. "Welcome, Sophia," Barbara said, her voice filled with affection. Robert, standing beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder and gave a simple nod of acknowledgement, his eyes kind. Sophia smiled, feeling the weight of the years of tension beginning to lift. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. For a moment, she stood there, taking it all in, the comfort of being here, of being accepted without hesitation. Olivia appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright, her smile full of relief. "You came," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. Sophia couldn't help but notice how much lighter Olivia looked, how the years of stress seemed to have melted away now that the truth had been laid bare. She looked more like the sister she remembered, vulnerable, but strong. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Sophia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like a promise to herself, a promise that no matter what had happened, she was still here. She was still part of this family. As they gathered around the table, a quiet but powerful sense of unity settled in the room. They didn't speak much about the past, not yet. Instead, they spoke of their present, of how Olivia was settling into her new life with Ryan, how Catherine was learning to be a more present mother, how Barbara's latest volunteer work was going. The conversation flowed easily, without the underlying tension that had always been there before. It felt natural. It felt right. For the first time in what seemed like forever, Sophia felt like she could exhale. The pain was still there, still lingering in the background, but it no longer defined her relationship with her family. It didn't control the narrative anymore. After dinner, as they all sat around the living room, sipping tea and talking about their plans for the future, Sophia felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned to find her mother standing beside her, an uncertain but hopeful look on her face. "I know we have a long way to go," Catherine said softly, "but I want you to know. I want to try. I want us to be a family again, truly." Sophia's heart swelled, and for the first time, she truly believed her mother. "I know, Mom," she said, her voice steady. "We're getting there. We'll get there together." Olivia joined them then, sitting beside Sophia with a quiet but heartfelt smile. "I'm sorry for everything," she said, her voice full of regret. "For not seeing what was happening. For not being there when you needed me most." Sophia reached over and took her sister's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "It's not about what's happened, Liv. It's about what happens next." She looked around at the family gathered around her, and a small, genuine smile tugged at her lips. "And right now, I'm glad it's this." The rest of the evening passed in a gentle blur of laughter, shared memories, and new hopes. As Sophia sat back and looked around the room, she realized that this was enough. This moment, with all of them together, was enough to start rebuilding everything that had been lost. In the quiet of the evening, with the warmth of her family surrounding her, Sophia finally allowed herself to believe in something she hadn't in years, that healing was possible, that forgiveness could bridge even the deepest divides, and that family, though imperfect, was worth fighting for. A few months had passed since that evening at Barbara and Robert's house, and with each passing day, Sophia felt the weight of her past lifting just a little more. The air in her home, in her heart, was lighter now. Her relationship with her mother, Catherine, had begun to heal, slowly but surely, as they worked through their differences. It was a delicate process, but every small gesture, every moment of understanding, was a victory. Olivia had been there for her, more than ever before, and together, they were rebuilding the bond that had been fractured for so long. Sophia found herself spending more time with them, sharing meals, laughing over old memories, and making new ones. There were still moments of awkwardness, moments where the ghosts of their past would try to resurface, but each time, they faced them together. They weren't perfect, but they were learning to be whole again, piece by piece. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Sophia stood by the window of her apartment, gazing out at the city below. The world outside was changing, just as her life had. The seasons were shifting, the colors of fall painting the trees in warm hues, and for the first time in a long while, Sophia allowed herself to look forward. She wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but she knew that, for the first time in years, she was not walking alone. She had her family back, and that meant everything. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Olivia. "Mom's coming over today. I know it's been hard, but we're doing this. We're moving forward, together." A smile tugged at Sophia's lips as she read the message. It wasn't just the words, it was the promise behind them, the understanding that no matter how hard things had been, they had found a way through it. It was their own way of moving forward, of healing, of learning to be the family they had once been, and more. Sophia put the phone down, her heart light. She had grown to understand that it wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about pretending that everything had always been okay. It was about accepting the imperfections, the mistakes, and choosing to move forward anyway. Choosing to forgive, to rebuild, to love again. That afternoon, as Catherine arrived at her apartment, there was no tension in the air, no distance between them. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time, Sophia didn't feel like she was walking on eggshells. They spoke about the future, the things they wanted to do together, the plans they had made, and how, slowly but surely, they were becoming a family again. Later that evening, they all gathered for dinner at Olivia's place. The table was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warmth of shared meals. They didn't need grand gestures or perfect moments, they had something better. They had the quiet comfort of knowing that, after everything, they were together. As they ate, Olivia reached across the table, taking Sophia's hand in hers. "I don't know how I could ever make up for the time we lost," she said softly, her eyes full of emotion. "But I'm here now. And I'll always be here." Sophia squeezed her sister's hand, her heart full. "You don't need to make up for anything, Liv. We're here now. That's all that matters." And in that moment, with the warmth of her family around her, Sophia realized something she had almost forgotten, that family wasn't just about blood, or shared memories, or even forgiveness, it was about the willingness to start again, to rebuild, to move forward. It was about the quiet moments, the small gestures, and the promise that, no matter what, you would always be there for each other. As they all sat together, sharing stories and laughing, Sophia knew that their journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead, but they were no longer facing them alone. And that, she thought, was the greatest gift of all. A new beginning had arrived, and this time it was filled with hope. A family reborn, not in perfection, but in love.